Welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to master one of the most important skills on the digital SAT reading and writing section, transitions. Now, many students believe transition questions are easy. They look at the answer choices and say, that sounds good. But that is exactly what the SAT wants you to do. It wants you to choose an answer because it sounds good. Today we are going to stop guessing, okay? We are going to use logic. Here is the formula for today's lesson. Relationship first, transition second, punctuation third. Remember these three steps, all right? Relationship, transition, punctuation. Let's begin with a story, okay? Imagine that you have just landed at a very large international airport, say Dubai International Airport. You leave the airplane and enter the terminal. Normally, you would see signs telling you where to go, right? Immigration, baggage claim, connecting flights, restaurants, and the exit. Now imagine that every sign has disappeared. You walk down one hallway, you turn left, you climb two stairs, escalators, and somehow 20 minutes later, you're standing beside the same airplane again. That is what a paragraph feels like without transitions. Transitions are directional signs for the reader. They tell us where the writer's thinking is going, right? A transition may tell us, I'm adding another idea. Here is an example. This happened because of the previous idea. Or be careful, the direction is about to change. Your job on SAT is not to choose the fanciest word. Your job is to identify the direction of the writer's thinking. Here's the most important strategy in the lesson. Do not begin with the answer choices. Let me say that again. Do not begin with the answer choices. Why? Because once you see the choices, your brain may try to make every answer sound possible. Let's look at an example. I studied for 6 hours, blank. I failed the exam. Before looking at any choices, right? What relationship do you notice? The first sentence creates an expectation. If someone studies for 6 hours, we expect that person to perform well. But the second sentence says, I failed the exam. The result goes against our expectation. So we need a transition that shows contrast. A good answer would be, I studied for 6 hours. However, I failed the exam. Now, suppose the choices are therefore, furthermore, however, for example. The correct answer is, of course, however. But when students stare at the choice for too long, they may sometimes begin inventing strange explanations. They might say, maybe the student studied for so long that he became tired. Maybe the tiredness caused him to fail. So perhaps therefore could work. No, okay. Do not invent a new story to rescue a wrong answer. Use the information that is already in the passage. So here is the method you should use on every transition caution, all right? And these are 4 steps. You may want to write it down. Step 1, read the full passage. Do not read only the sentence that contains a blank. The relationship may depend on the information from the previous sentence, right? Step 2, ignore the blank. Read the 2 ideas separately. Step 3, describe the relationship using simple language. Ask yourself, is the writer adding information? Is the writer giving an example? Is the writer showing a result? Is the writer changing direction? Is the writer clarifying an idea, or is the writer describing a sequence, right? You can use very simple phrases in your mind. Same direction, opposite direction. This caused that. Here comes an example, right? So step 4. Now look at the answer choices. Choose the transition that performs the job you already identified, right? You're no longer asking which word sounds good. You're asking which word does the job I need. That is much easier question, right? Now, I'm going to walk you through 3 families of transitions, right? So most SAT transition questions belong to 3 major families. Think of these as 3 families living in the same neighborhood, right? The first family is a nice family, agrees with everyone. The second family causes everything. And the third family argues with everyone. Okay. So let's meet the first family. So first families are continuers, right? The continuers move in the same direction as the previous idea. They may add information, give an example, clarify an idea, emphasize something, or show a sequence, all right? And transitions that add information include like moreover, furthermore, in addition, also, and additionally, right? So here's an example, all right? Malik is an excellent mathematics student. Moreover, he is an accomplished musician. The second sentence adds another positive fact about Malik. It does not disagree with the first sentence. It is not caused by this first sentence, right? It simply adds more information. Here is another example. Our restaurant serves delicious food. In addition, we have free parking, right? The free parking was not caused by the delicious food. It does not contradict the delicious food. It is simply another reason to visit the restaurant. And depending on the city, free parking may be the most impressive part, right? So transitions that introduce examples, right, include, for example, for instance, specifically, and to illustrate. Listen to this sentence, right? Some animals use tools to obtain food. For example, certain chimpanzees use sticks to collect termites. The first sentence gives us a broad idea. Some animals use tools, right? The second sentence gives us one specific example. Chimpanzees are one example of animals that use tools. Here's a useful question to ask. Is the second sentence one specific example of the larger idea? If the answer is yes, you probably need an example transition. Okay? So some transitions clarify or strengthen an idea, and these include in fact, indeed, in other words, and that is, right? The scientist's discovery was significant. In fact, it changed how researchers understood the disease. The second sentence, it strengthens the first sentence, right? Now listen to this example. The device is portable. In other words, users can easily carry it from one location to another. The second sentence restates the first idea more clearly. But be careful. In fact, and in other words, are not always interchangeable. In fact, usually emphasizes or strengthens an idea. In other words, usually restates or explains an idea. They belong to the same general family, but they do not perform exactly the same job. All right. Some transitions show time or order. These include first, next, subsequently, previously, finally, and meanwhile. For example, the research collected soil samples. Next, they analyzed the sample in a lab or in a laboratory. The ideas are connected by order, right? Think about a cooking video. First, add the flour. Next, add the eggs. Finally, call your mother because you've forgotten how to cook, right? This is a sequence. It may not be a successful recipe, but the transition are excellent. All right. Now look at the family two, cause and effect family, right? Cause and effect transitions. I mean, these transitions show that the second idea is a result of the first. Common cause and effect transitions include therefore, consequently, thus, hence, accordingly, and as a result. Here's an example. The road was covered with ice, therefore the school closed for the day. The icy road caused or strongly contributed to the school closing. Here's another example. Sarah forgot to change her phone. Consequently, she could not use it during the trip. The dead phone is a result of Sarah not charging it. You can use what I call the domino test, all right? Imagine two dominoes. The first event falls, then it knocks down the second event. Ask yourself, did the first idea produce the second? If the answer is yes, look for a cause and effect transition. Consider this example. The company reduced the price of its product, blank, the sales increased. The price reduction may have caused the increase in sales, right? So a logical answer is As a result, sales increased, right? Now consider this example. The company reduced the price of its product, blank. It changed the color of its logo, right? Did lowering the price cause the company to change the logo? Probably not, right? The second sentence may add another fact, but it is not necessarily a result. So remember this important rule, right? Just because one event happens after another does not mean that the first event caused the second. Sequence is not automatically cause and effect. All right, now let's look at the family tree, the contradictors, right? The contradictors signal that the writer is changing direction. Common contrast transitions include however, nevertheless, nonetheless, in contrast, on the other hand, still, and yet. All right, so here's an example. The apartment is small, however, it receives plenty of natural light, right? The second sentence changes direction. A small apartment may sound negative, but the plenty of natural light sounds positive, right? The ideas are not complete opposite, but they create a contrast, right? The surprise test, right? I mean, you can use what I call the surprise set. Ask yourself, does the second idea challenge what I expected after the reading the first? Here's the example. The runner injured her ankle shortly before the race. Blank. She finished in first place. What would you expect after reading the first sentence, right? You might expect the runner to lose. You might expect her to struggle. You might even expect her to withdraw from the race. Instead, she finished in first place, right? That's a surprise. A strong transition would be, nevertheless, she finished in first place. Now let's look at however versus in contrast, right? However and in contrast, these words are similar, right? But they're not always identical. However, can introduce a general change in direction. For example, the software is expensive, however, it is extremely reliable. In contrast, compares two different people, objects, groups, or places. For example, desert temperatures can exceed 40 degrees Celsius. In contrast, polar regions remain extremely cold. When two separate subjects are being directionally compared, in contrast, maybe more precise, right? What you need to do is become a transition detective, right? Imagine that you are detective transition. Your mission is to examine two statements and identify the relationship between them. Case number one. Some students believe that reading quickly is the best way to finish the SAT on time. Blank. Reading too quickly can cause students to miss important details. What do we have? The first statement presents a belief, right? The second statement presents a problem with that belief. So the direction changes. We need a contrast transition, right? A logical answer would be, however, reading too quickly can cause students to miss important details. All right, let's look at the second example. The museum wanted to attract more young visitors. Blank. It created an interactive mobile app. Why did the museum create the app? Because it wanted to attract younger visitors, right? The second action is a result of the first idea. A logical answer is, therefore, it created an interactive mobile app, right? All right, now let's look at the third example. Many birds migrate over long distances, blank. The Arctic tern travels from Arctic to the Antarctic and back. The Arctic tern is a specific example of a bird that migrates a long distance. A logical answer is, for example, the Arctic tern travels from Arctic to the Antarctic and back. Notice what we did? We identified the job first, right? We selected the transition. That is the method. All right, now let's look at the punctuation rules, right? This is where good students sometimes lose points. You may understand the relationship perfectly. You may select the transition word, but you may still choose the wrong answer because of punctuation. Words such as however, therefore, moreover, consequently, and nevertheless, and are often called conjunctive adverbs, right? These words cannot join two complete sentences. using only a comma. Listen to the incorrect sentence. The city is old, however, it contains many modern buildings. This sentence is correct. Why? Because the city is old is a complete sentence and it contains many modern buildings. It's a complete sentence. A single comma is not enough to join them. The comma is trying its best, but it simply does not have the qualifications for the job. The error is called a comma splice. All right, let's look at the another pattern, right? The city is old, period. However, it contains many modern buildings. A period separates the two complete sentences. However, begins the second sentence and is followed by a comma. Here's another pattern, all right? The city is old, semicolon. However, comma, it contains modern buildings. A semicolon connects the two complete sentences. Remember this pattern, okay? Complete sentence, semicolon, transition, comma, complete sentence. Or remember it this way, right? Semicolon before, comma after. Semicolon before, comma after. One interesting story, my daughter taught me this, okay? All right. Transition can also appear as an interruption in the middle of a sentence. For example, the city is old. It does, however, contain many modern buildings. The word, however, interrupts the sentence because it is non-essential. It is surrounded by commas. You can remove it and the sentence still works, right? The city is old. It does contain many modern buildings, right? All right, there's another thing called FANBOYS. I think I recorded a lecture on it before too. FANBOYS stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Okay. These are coordinating conjunctions. They can join two complete sentences when they're preceded by a comma. For example, the city is old, but it contains many modern buildings. That sentence is correct, right? Now compare these two patterns. The city is old, comma, but it contains modern buildings. Okay. And the city is old, semicolon, however, comma, it contains modern buildings. Do not treat, however, like but. Okay, this sentence is incorrect. The city is old, however, it contains modern building. This sentence is correct. You don't need a comma after however, right? The city is old, but it contains modern buildings. And this sentence is also correct, right? The city is old, semicolon, however, comma, it contains modern building. Okay. All right, now let us discuss one of the fastest elimination strategies, right? The synonym shortcut. Suppose the choices are therefore, consequently, for however, for example. Therefore and consequently usually perform the same basic job. Both show a result. Can both be correct? No. The SAT gives you only one correct answer. So two answer choices are true functional synonyms and they fit the sentence in exactly the same way. They usually eliminate each other. This is especially useful with pairs such as therefore and consequently, however and nevertheless, moreover and furthermore, for example and for instance. But use this shortcut carefully, all right? Some transitions may look similar without doing exactly the same job. For example, in fact, emphasizes. In other words, restates. For example, provides an illustration. All three may continue the discussion, but they perform different functions. The safest method is to first determine the relationship. Second, notice any true synonym pairs. Third, eliminate choices that cannot be uniquely correct. Now let us walk through an Antarctica example. Imagine that a passage explains the climate of Antarctica. Conditions in the interior of Antarctica are extremely inhospitable. Temperatures remain far below freezing, the air is exceptionally dry, and strong winds are common. Blank. The Antarctic Peninsula experiences relatively mild temperatures and contain areas of liquid water. First, ignore the blank, all right? Interior Antarctica is extremely inhospitable. The Antarctica Peninsula is relatively mild. Are these ideas moving in the same direction? No, right? Does one cause the other? No, right? Is the peninsula an example of the harsh interior? Definitely not. The two regions are compared. Their conditions are different. We need a contrast transition. Okay? Suppose the choices are therefore, for instance, indeed, in contrast. Let us test them, okay? Therefore would mean that the harsh interior conditions cause the peninsula to have mild temperatures, right? That does not make sense. Eliminate it. For instance, would mean that the mild peninsula is an example of the inhospitable interior, right? It's not eliminated, okay? Indeed, would strengthen or confirm the first idea, but the second idea presents a different situation. So eliminate it. In contrast, signals a direct comparison, right, between the interior and the peninsula. That is the correct answer. And in contrast, right? All right, I'll see you in the next lesson. Until then, adios.